I'm looking at this script and all 16 Marys whom I have to cover. Yes, I said it was 17, it's actually 16, I miscounted, my bad. Either way, this is going to be such a long video. It's very intimidating. I don't know if you will agree with some of my choices. I've been putting it off as long as I can because I knew that this was probably going to be a huge project, one of my biggest feats so far. But I know that many have been waiting for this list, and given that the Richard III rankings didn't instill much anger in me, I think we're overdue a freak out. Mary Queen of Scots' portrayals are much like Anne Boleyn's. Her story is an obvious go-to when it comes to making a Tudor drama. For one thing, it's a very well-known story and the chance for a studio to push for some awards. In this list, I will also talk about the portrayals of the four Marys, Francois II, Lord Darnley, Lord Bothwell, and if I can, I will attempt to discuss the relationship between Mary and the Earl of Moray and John Knox, if they happen to appear. I don't mind if certain depictions show a meeting scene between Elizabeth and Mary, because even though that didn't happen and they never met in real life, it's always interesting to see what would have happened if these two came together, and how they get away with explaining how they ended up meeting. This segment is not exactly the bottom of the list, but reserved for the two depictions of Mary where she appears and she's a focus, but the screen time is very, very short, even shorter than the worst depictions. They're placed here merely by default.
You are Mary Queen of Scots?
I am.
This one is easy. Some of you may have already seen this on the internet, as this very short film is the subject of quite a few firsts. To start with, this is the first depiction of Mary on screen. She was played by a man, Robert L. Thomas, in the old theatrical tradition of men playing women. This film is considered one of the first times that actual actors were used for an on-screen production. And, quite infamously, this was the first time that filmmakers realised that they could use editing for special effects. You probably won't be surprised to hear that Thomas Edison was the producer. He was experimenting with film since 1890. Here, Mary is blindfolded and places her head on the block, and the executioner beheads her. If you look closely, you can see the jump cut where the body of Thomas is replaced with a mannequin. Allegedly, when this was released to the public, audiences genuinely believed that the actor had been beheaded, because the idea of film was so new and people were not clued into special effects as we are now. I don't know how accurate this account is. It may be one of those urban legends. Come on then. Oh. Much like the story of Orson Welles' War of the Worlds broadcast, where you usually hear that there was panic throughout the US, where people actually thought that the Martians were invading, but while this did happen, it was only in a few locations. I remember when I first saw it, I did notice the jump cut, and I was a little surprised that they showed the beheading, because you rarely see that on screen today unless you're watching HBO. Since then, Tudor-style beheadings are usually filmed with dramatic cuts from the sword or axe swinging to someone watching in the crowd, or having the beheading censored by a random object. And yes, in this version, Mary loses her head with one blow, but I think being able to show the beheading was enough for Thomas Edison.
I repudiate the legality of these proceedings against me. I know nothing of this man Babington, nor ever exchange letters with him. I would rather shipwreck my soul than seek your death.
This mini-series was one of the better Tudor dramas to come out of the 2000s, but the depiction of Mary was lacking. The entire focus is on Elizabeth and her court, so there is no coverage of Mary in Scotland, or her eventual downfall and imprisonment. It being only 4 episodes long, there are large time jumps between them. So episode 2 ended in the 1560s, and the third began in the late 1570s. Mary is shown in brief clips as she pets her dog, and later is led to her execution. When it comes to the Babington plot, the narrative primarily follows that of Walsingham and his spy network. You understand his eagerness to get rid of Mary. Charlotte Winner looks just like a brunette version of Anne-Marie Duff, so they got the family resemblance on point. Walsingham actually frames Mary, noting that she does not think ahead the way Elizabeth did when she was in the Tower. Where Elizabeth altered her letter to her sister so it could not be tampered with, Mary left enough space for Walsingham to ask for the names of the conspirators. Elizabeth realises that Walsingham put her in this corner, where she stated that the perpetrator must have knowledge of their actions in the conspiracy. Every detail is considered throughout the trial, complete with where to place Mary so as not to make her unequal to Elizabeth. Her only lines of dialogue are in letters to Elizabeth, but hey, at least she has a French accent.
Rahima, my dear daughter-in-law, Queen Mary. Mary? 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 Mary?
At the time of this video's release, The Serpent Queen has been approved for a second season that will come out in 2024. At the end of the first season, Mary has returned to Scotland, but I don't know if she will return, as the show focuses primarily on Catherine de Medici, who pretty much washed her hands of Mary the moment she left French court. I was not prepared for how frustrating this show is. It looked good from the trailer and the first couple of episodes were tolerable, but the further you get, the more you realise that there are very few, if any, redeeming features. The premise of The Serpent Queen is that Catherine de Medici, played by Samantha Morton, has taken on a new maid, Rahima, and tells her about her life up until the present. Each episode is divided between the aftermath of Francois II's death and flashbacks from Catherine's past. Rahima, and by extension the audience, first meet Mary at the end of episode 3. And let's talk about the four Marys right away. The first encounter with Mary is like a scene from a high school drama where the new girl who's made friends with the gothy outcast meets the cheer squad for the first time. Rather than the Marys having the same name by sheer coincidence, Mary has forcibly renamed her ladies, and at least one of them was born French. Though she says it's out of dedication to the Virgin Mary, you can tell it was because of ego. Mary is under the delusion that the French throne is rightfully hers as Francois' widow. She wants to stop Charles IX being king and Catherine being regent. I think that scene alone gave me a headache. Mary wouldn't have a say on the succession with no child. What's more, women could not rule in their own right in France due to Salic law. And it's all downhill from there. Mary becomes this two-dimensional swivel-eyed loon who wants to stamp out Protestantism in France and overrules Francois, who is too ill to be assertive. Meanwhile, Catherine is the tolerant and restrained one. That ain't right. Pretty sure we got our characters mixed up. Nonetheless, Mary is very easy to manipulate. Catherine pretends to be her ally in order to get the Bourbons to drop their bid for the regency, and convinces Mary to cut off Louis de Condé's finger to send back to King Antoine. That might have worked in an episode of Reign, but not here.
See you later. I'm going to the library.
Lisa gets to do what she wants, and you don't yell at her.
Hey, I've earned their trust.
Oh, everybody trusts Lisa. Precious little Lisa, apple of her daddy's eye.
Long story short, Rahima gives Mary a fake letter from Elizabeth, promising to help her take the French throne. So Mary goes to Scotland, and it's literally only after she's touched down that she realises she's been had. It's hard to feel any sympathy for a character who is written and acted so badly. Sometimes I can justify portrayals that are told in flashback where the person having said flashback might be looking at certain characters through a biased lens. But because we cut back and forth to the present, where the characters are pretty much the same then as they are now, such an argument cannot be made here. The Serpent Queen had some potential, especially in terms of costuming, locations and premise. But when it is so painful to look at in execution, I had no choice but to place this at the bottom of the list. This Mary is so dense and unlikable that she deserves to be overthrown. Should she appear in the next season, I think I can guess what that will look like.
This show ain't no good.
Oh, while we're on the subject of Samantha Morton.
The Queen orders these measures for your protection.
The Queen? I am a queen.
I remember Elizabeth the Golden Age being a film I would watch regularly when I was in the early years of my Tudor obsession. I was also in a position to watch the extended Lord of the Rings trilogy for the first time, and I was watching it almost religiously, so Cate Blanchett was a huge appeal. I didn't like the first Elizabeth film very much. Although Daniel Craig's audition for Anakin Skywalker was a brief highlight, the gruesome execution scenes terrified 14-year-old me. Golden Age takes place in the 1580s, just before the Babington plot begins. History buffs had a pretty straightforward way of describing the bizarre setting for her imprisonment.
Fotheringay Castle was located in Northamptonshire, England, not in a Scottish loch in the bloody Highlands. I mean, think about it. How dumb would you have to be to lock up a foreign queen in her own country? I swear the logic of this decision was like, how do we let the audience know that she's Scottish? Seriously, it's like if they made a movie about El Chapo, but instead of his final trial taking place in New York City, they wanted to make it really clear to the audience he's Mexican.
Mary has a Scottish accent, which is a big red flag as to what we're in for. Her only speaking lady-in-waiting has a French accent, however. Though she is not named, she is credited as Annette Fleming, aka Mary Fleming. Don't know why they said Fleming and not Seaton. What, did the Seaton estate not want to put their hand to this film? Then again, there are 3 more women with her who follow Mary like an entourage, so maybe they're meant to be the 4 Marys. I don't know why Mary couldn't have had a French accent too, because her mother was featured in the previous film, or simply let Morton keep her English accent. This Mary is definitely more villainous than most of the others. The Catholic antagonists in both films do a lot of lingering in the shadows and speaking ominously with sly looks. Rhys Ifans looks turned on by the divinity of his mission. Philip II almost looks like a bug. It feels very exaggerated and not remotely natural. Mary keeps much restraint on her emotion, which pays off later down the line when she finds out that Walsingham has trapped her. The Babington plot is a bit of a mess. You see it build up throughout the film with Robert Reston being sent to England by Philip II. This guy is meant to be John Ballard, but they gave that name to Daniel Craig in the previous film. Babington is played by Eddie Redmayne, who appears to be auditioning for Les Mis and Jupiter Ascending in this film. He is nothing more than a pawn. He believes that they are freeing Mary, but Reston Ballard is deliberately trying to martyrise Mary, so Philip will invade. They also mix events up with the Throckmorton plot to build the dangerous climate in Elizabeth's court. Walsingham does not thwart the plot before it can start. No, instead, for the drama, Ballard Reston gives Babington a pistol and he shoots Elizabeth. But wait, the gun wasn't loaded. How does an assassin not check to see if the gun is loaded? And that's when Tom Hollander comes in with his lovely smooth voice and tells Mary that Walsingham has every letter she has ever written. The trial and execution happens quickly, where it seems Mary's trial took place in a storage cupboard because the judges looked all huddled together, as if there isn't enough room to sit down. The only really good scene with Mary is the execution. It has the nature of being this point of no return for Elizabeth, and the colour contrast between Mary's red dress and the muted backdrop works well. That's all I will say for now, as I want to save the execution scenes for the next video.
This was not a Catholic who murdered a Protestant. This was a Scot who murdered a Scot.
Dear King God, this is one of the worst miniseries I have ever seen. And it's a BBC miniseries. They usually make the best ones outside of cable TV. I do have a feeling that because this came out the year after the ITV Henry VIII, this was the BBC trying to cash in on its popularity. Is that a word? I don't even know if that miniseries was well received, but here we go. The first episode centres on Mary's return to Scotland until her eventual downfall. The second episode focuses on the accession of James VI to the English throne and the Gunpowder Plot. I don't know if I'm ever going to rank the Gunpowder Plot, even though Bonfire Night is one of the UK's most treasured holidays. Personally, I think fireworks should be banned, like they are in some US states, where only controlled events can show fireworks. But that is a completely different story. The point is, I really want to get this series over and done with, and so I will talk about both episodes here. How do I explain the Gunpowder Plot to a non-Brit? Imagine, if you will, that 2 years after George Washington became president, some English loyalists rent out a basement in Independence Hall with the intention of blowing up the president, the cabinet, and Congress during the State of the Union address, or whatever the American equivalent is to the state opening of Parliament. However, one of the conspirators has a brother-in-law who's a congressman, so they send a letter telling said congressman not to go to Independence Hall on that day. The congressman then tells the president, and they wait to catch the plotters in the act, have them brutally executed in public, and every year America would celebrate Congress not being destroyed in a treasonous attack. Imagine that, by setting off a ton of fireworks and burning the explosive expert of the conspirators in effigy. Although, knowing America, there would probably be tons of monuments of them dotted around the South. Gunpowder Treason and Plot, or GTAB for short, is the first instance on this list where we play a little game called Which Scottish Actor Are We Wasting the Talents Of This Time? In this case, it's the dad from Billy Elliot, Poseidon from the Percy Jackson film We Do Not Talk Of, and Rumpelstiltskin. I remember this mini-series vaguely from when I was little. It was one of those shows that your parents watch after you've gone to bed, but before television could be paused. So when 9-year-old me comes down to get something to drink, they're like, "Go back upstairs!" A part of me was intrigued to see this show in full, but now I wish I'd never bothered. The first episode feels like a cheap retelling of the Vanessa Redgrave film, with all the irritating filming techniques of the early 2000s. Shaky cam everywhere. Want to capture an actor's emotion? Stick the camera right in their face. To hell with the claustrophobes. Clemence Posey feels a little underutilised. She is one of the better elements and probably the only sympathetic figure you will find in both episodes. She at least brought in the unique element that is Mary's French accent. Her bright blonde hair stands out against the wet and grim backdrop of the court. She definitely deserved a better project to play Mary. It wasn't her fault that this interpretation failed her. There is no Francois II in this version, which was the only reason she was in France to begin with. She comes back after Marie de Guise has died, and only one of the Marys is here. She is not credited with a last name and is only noted as Lady Marie. She is in love with Darnley's servant who is killed alongside him, so she turns on Mary after the murder. Who's that? Hi, Louis. Look at you interrupting a video. Darnley's assholery is cranked up to 11. He is usually portrayed as an insecure coward, but here he is much more of a violent bully who appears to have come straight from the set of EastEnders. I mean, technically he has, because Paul Nicholls was in EastEnders. He openly attempts to assault Mary. Thankfully, Lady Marie stops him. I did like the scene that triggers Mary to order Bothwell to kill him, where he takes baby James out into the rain and heavily indicates that he may kill their son. The episode ends with Mary having everything taken away from her and being imprisoned, and that's pretty much the last you see of her. The second episode begins in the 1580s, with King James allowing his mother's execution so long as he becomes heir to England. Mary is only shown in 2 brief scenes, now depicted as much older, but we never see her face. I don't think that's Clemence Posey in old people makeup, more likely just an uncredited actress. Most of the second episode centres on Robert Carlyle doing what Robert Carlyle does best, yelling at the top of his lungs. He yells at Parliament, he yells at his wife, he extorts a Catholic Englishman, and I don't like this episode of Once Upon a Time.
Thomas Percy must not be taken alive. He will say that we promised the Catholics toleration, and that, of course, is a lie.
What the hell? I thought Rumpelstiltskin never broke a deal. What I hate about this episode is that all the characters are scum. You can't root for anyone. James is a woman-hating, shouty bastard. Guy Fawkes is cardboard. The other conspirators are no better. Yes, I really want to root for a guy who will trick a woman into a vulnerable position and then strangle her to death. Get as far as you can from this miniseries. Clemence Posey is the only good thing about it, but there are far better things to watch her in than this.
Do not play into their hands. Our enmity is precisely what they hope for. I know your heart has more within it than the men who counsel you. I am more man than woman now. The throne has made me so.
Note to the filmmakers, Margot Robbie is the wrong person to cast if you want to make this point.
Probably the biggest disappointment on the list, much like how Natalie Portman was the biggest disappointment for the Anne Boleyn list. Putting a good actress in a mediocre movie is infuriating. Putting a great actress in a terrible movie is unforgivable. I remember a good deal of, not exactly hype, but optimism for this film in the build-up to its release. Then it came out and the overall view was that it fell short of expectations. Universal tends to make a lot of big-scale disappointing Tudor dramas. There are a couple of positives that came from the film, such as Saoirse Ronan and Margot Robbie becoming friends, and Ronan starting a relationship with Darnley's actor Jack Lowden. The director had to fight to keep a scene where Mary has her period. That I can get behind. We need more menstruation normalisation. The fact that Ronan only learned to ride for the film was impressive. Kudos on any actors that take the time to learn for a role. I first watched the movie last year when I was starting to gather all the Mary Queen of Scots portrayals together, and I watched it again recently for this list, 2 days after finishing Reign. I really wanted to like this film. I was hoping that when I finally watched it, I'd find something to enjoy that no one else was seeing. But no, I was disappointed. The waste of David Tennant's presence aside, it is infuriating to deliberately give Mary a Scottish accent in this. Ronan is Irish, and she's proven to be able to give a convincing English accent since her teen years. They went to extra effort to be incorrect. As much as I love Scottish scenery, there's this Hollywood aesthetic of showing these people living in giant castles in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by great swathes of the countryside and little villages with unwashed masses. When in fact, Edinburgh was a pretty big city at the time, probably the largest settlement in Scotland. But any scenes outside of the palace show nought but hills and moors. Aren't there any palace gardens they could walk through? The film opens with Mary on her way to the block, while flashing back to her arrival in Scotland. As such, we don't see anything about her time in France. Thank goodness. I dread to think how they would have handled Catherine de Medici. The 4 Marys are reasonably well portrayed. They tend to spread out their characteristics between them, where Mary Fleming is the one who speaks primarily in French, when you'd expect Mary Seton to do so. Nonetheless, you get a feel of them all being a close-knit group of friends who trust each other. Darnley is your typical Darnley. He is not fully developed, but he's not two-dimensional. From his first scene in the film, you get the impression of a man who's a disappointment to his father. He is only around because his blood is useful. The conception scene between him and Mary is all kinds of uncomfortable. For one thing, Darnley never fully consents, and Mary is robbed of control during the act. No one is in the right in this scene. Now, typically, Bothwell is usually presented as a headstrong romantic hero. There is much debate as to whether Bothwell and Mary really were having an affair, or if Bothwell forced her to marry him because he wanted power. Most of these depictions that feature Bothwell have chosen the former, a true love that Mary was robbed of on top of everything else, the right person at the wrong time. This film goes the other way. Mary had no part in Darnley's murder by Bothwell, and is tricked by him into leaving her son behind and fleeing to Dunbar, where her ladies, except Seton, who was left with James, are made to participate in Bothwell's, let's say, coercion of Mary. I get that the film was presenting every major male character turning on Mary for their own desires because patriarchy horrible, some more transparently than others. Even Rizzio crosses a line by taking Mary's place on her wedding night, but it might have been a bit ham-fisted there, and simply piling more drama onto Mary to make the audience feel extra sorry for her. The scene between Mary and Elizabeth could have been better. There is some interesting background to it, as this was Ronan's first scene as Mary and Margot Robbie's last scene as Elizabeth. The two of them rehearsed this scene separately, and the filming for it was the first time they actually spoke to each other in character. They weren't scripted to cry during the exchange, that was entirely improvised. But I would have set it in a better place than a laundry shed. There's symbolism in the two being separated by a flimsy barrier. But if this had been filmed in a country house, you could still have had that, just have them be separated by a screen. Plus, I don't like that Mary is more assertive than Elizabeth. Elizabeth, who held all the cards. Elizabeth, who struggled to keep one throne, while 2 were handed to Mary by virtue of birth and marriage. Elizabeth, who never took her enemies for granted. I know that Margot Robbie has that element of Glenda Jackson in there somewhere. Where is it? That's as much as I'm going to say about this movie, because I've already filled 2 full pages. Don't worry, we still have a ways to go before we're done with Mary. And this movie.
I bet you think the Stuarts were an English dynasty.
But we only came to England when the crown belonged to me.
Our clan may hail from Scotland, but our tale's not a bonny one, you say.
I'm surprised that there weren't more sketches involving Mary Queen of Scots in the original Horrible Histories run. We literally only get this song in Series 4, and an earlier sketch, which was like a tabloid magazine talking about how the executioner bungled the job.
Oh no, I'll let the big occasion get to me, I'm afraid. I kept hitting her head and her shoulders instead of her neck. But luckily the story has a happy ending. I sawed through her neck gristle.
If there had been more sketches, I'm sure that they would have added the fact that Mary would likely have not sounded Scottish. But for the purposes of this song, I suppose we could let it slide. Once again, we come back to a Horrible Histories song. I will never stop loving these songs. They are endlessly creative and hilarious.
I'm the king who brought back partying.
This isn't a song specifically about Mary. Instead, it's about the unlucky history of the House of Stuart as a whole. It's called the Blue-Blooded Blues. You've got to say it in a Scottish accent. To get into a Scottish accent, I have to keep saying, "Me mother's a bear, so we got the Blue-Blooded Blues." It's based on the song Roadhouse Blues by the Doors, but it's also a play on Blue Suede Shoes by Elvis Presley. Robert III, played by Ben Wilbond, and James VI/First, played by Matt Bainton, join Mary in their recap of the House of Stuart. Robert III recalls his numerous failures, followed by the 5 unlucky King Jameses who succeeded him. Mary's verse centres on her misfortune on being imprisoned by Elizabeth. Nothing else.
Listen to Tudor, take a guess.
Beheaded?
Yeah.
Following her, they continue on with the Gunpowder Plot and Charles I's beheading. To be honest, the rest of the Stuart monarchs didn't have much luck either. Perhaps Mary would have been able to say more if given her own song. Maybe something like Richard III's song. Still, it's at least a jazzy and fun song to listen to, and I love it when the Horrible Histories cast break out into their Scottish accents.
Thomas is with me, aren't you, Thomas?
Hardly, I'm Scottish.
Balderdash.
Hold your wheest! I'm as Scottish as shortbread in a tartan tin, sir. Now, if you'll excuse me.
Thank God for Regionless DVDs, and the Met for broadcasting their performances. There are quite a few recordings, both visual and audio, of Gaetano Donizetti's 1835 opera Maria Stuarda. Not Maria Stuarda Regina di Scozia, although I really do like saying that. I chose Di Donato's rendition because this was the only recording where I could get a high quality performance. High quality is in resolution. I will be talking about the opera's depiction of Mary as a whole, but also what Di Donato brings to the role. I was embarking upon my research of the Mary Queen of Scots portrayals when I saw her play Virginia Woolf in the operatic adaptation of The Hours. That was a really good show, by the way, and I encourage everyone to go and watch it. Like The Hours, this prose shot was filmed at the Metropolitan Opera in New York. Di Donato had already played the role before in Minnesota. Though Mary's role is typically given to a soprano and Elizabeth is the mezzo, as the secondary female character, the roles are switched here, so Elsa van den Heever is the soprano and Di Donato is the mezzo. Either way, I just can't tell the difference between the two voice types. There is a deeper meaning behind assigning certain voice types to certain roles in opera, but I don't have the time or patience to get into it. Maybe another time. The first act of Maria Stuarda has Elizabeth reluctantly considering marriage to the Duke of Anjou, followed by her decision to visit Mary at Robert Dudley's behest. We then meet Mary, who is out in the woods lamenting her lost youth and happy life in France, before she is met with Elizabeth herself. Elizabeth remonstrates Mary, who has been warned by Talbot and Dudley beforehand not to trigger Elizabeth's anger. But the constant insults causes Mary to break, and basically say every bad thought she has had about Elizabeth that she cannot take back. Although Elizabeth still has all the power, she has been thoroughly humiliated. The second act has 3 scenes. The first of Elizabeth considering Mary's death warrant, before ordering Dudley to witness Mary's execution. The second is Mary learning of her impending fate, and the damage she has caused to others. And finally, her execution, where she is led to her death. These operas usually end with the character being led off stage to their execution, and sometimes the staging reflects them ascending to heaven, but in other cases they might have the execution represented with lots of red fabric. Now, there's something about this opera that I neglected to mention, and that is how Robert Dudley was used. To put it bluntly, he's simping for the wrong queen. We know for a fact that Robert Dudley only had eyes for Elizabeth, to the detriment of both his marriages. But here, he is Mary's champion and wants to free her so they can be together. To be honest, Robert Dudley is the one person whom Elizabeth would not turn against for supporting Mary, and he doesn't actually do any plotting and just wants to convince Elizabeth to release her. Elizabeth is shown as the jealous shrew, forcing him to watch her die. But like, this is my historical OTP. Gaetano Donizetti, I know you've been dead for nearly 200 years, but you do not mess with my OTP. I swear, if it was 2014 and Donizetti had a Tumblr page... Anyway, personally I prefer Donizetti's Anna Bolena for putting a new spin on the Boleyn and Seymour rivalry. The conflict there felt much more personal and heartbreaking. The opera had its fair share of controversies in its beginning. During rehearsal, when the original Mary said, Mezzo, who was playing Elizabeth, took it personally and a catfight broke out. Then the opera was banned by King Ferdinand II of Naples after the dress rehearsal, possibly because Queen Maria Cristina was related to Mary Queen of Scots, but also because Mary's insult towards Elizabeth was seen as a little too risque. This was when Donizetti attempted to take on Lady Jane Grey, but was unsuccessful. But that was a blessing in disguise, as we've established that Lady Jane Grey operas are cursed. He railed against many attempts at rewriting the opera, before he at last got to release it the way he wanted on the 30th of December 1835 at La Scala in Milan, with Maria Malibran playing Mary, who, if you remember the Lost Media of Lady Jane Grey video, was the original soprano who was going to play Jane. Joyce DiDonato is good at playing someone whose true feelings are bubbling under the surface and their facade is difficult to maintain. Then, when said facade breaks, the power of her voice matches that rage. She was a perfect fit for both Mary in the opera and Mary Queen of Scots as a whole.
Madame, I will protect you! Rachel was killed by Conley, your own husband!
The other opera on this list was actually made by a Scottish composer, Thea Musgrave. Musgrave has written 10 operas, one of which was an adaptation of A Christmas Carol, and another was about Harriet Tubman. Musgrave wrote both the score and the libretto for Mary Queen of Scots, which was the first of her works to be based on a real person. Rather than look at Mary's relationship with Elizabeth and her ultimate execution, this work begins and ends with Mary's life in Scotland. Moray acts as the main antagonist towards Mary. He schemes to get the throne for himself, manipulating Darnley and murdering Cardinal Beaton. He is murdered at the end of the opera, after Mary has been exiled, by Lord Gordon, who is Mary's chief supporter. The four Marys are given roles of their own here. Their voices are a mix of mezzo and soprano, but I think that must change depending on which performers get cast. Darnley's antagonism does not seem as significant this time around, as he is merely a puppet being used by James. When he is murdered, it's unclear if Bothwell murdered him or Moray to frame Bothwell. Bothwell himself is still as opportunistic as ever, who only supports Mary in exchange for her body, playing up the ambiguous relationship between the two. The key conflict is between Mary and Moray. There's no John Knox to be found, with the former asserting her desire and need to stand alone, so her rule will not be corrupted by selfish people. This Mary definitely has an inner strength and resolve. Her declaration to stand alone is both empowering and isolating. She must follow this path because she cannot trust her brother or her husband. Even though we do not see her eventual execution, her grim fate is hinted at nonetheless. The opera was first performed at the Edinburgh Festival in 1977, with Catherine Wilson being the first Mary in the role, where Musgrave conducted the orchestra. Scottish Opera, which, as the name indicates, was the National Operatic Company for Scotland, toured with it around the UK and gave a performance in Germany in 1980. It would premiere in the US in Virginia in 1978, where Ashley Putnam played the role of Mary, which was later released as a live recording in 1989. The footage you are seeing was filmed at the Church of St Mary the Virgin in New York on 27th of May 2018, with Jenny Sanderlin playing Mary. This was a concert to mark Thea Musgrave's 90th birthday. She's still alive as of writing this script, by the way. Only a few scenes from the second act are played out here, however. Still, you get a feel of the bitter conflict within the opera. The libretto was written in English, though you've probably noticed that all operas tend to be subtitled regardless of language. The opera at least tries to play around with Mary's story rather than follow the regular beats and show it purely as a familial conflict between brother and sister. That is almost always overshadowed by the rivalry between Mary and Elizabeth. For once, the latter is nowhere to be seen. Much like with the Lady Jane Grey rankings in this video, I wanted to include this fan-made spin-off to Six the Musical. This is where other Tudor figures have been designed in the aesthetic of the musical, and certain songs have been assigned to them that fits their story and personality. Once again, shout out to RTE who designed Mary Queen of Scots' appearance. Mary's song is Part of Me by Katy Perry, and the accompanying animatic quickly summarises her return to Scotland and her downfall. This is a pretty good song because the lyrics apply to Mary perfectly. No matter how much was taken away from her, the people in her life like Darnley and Elizabeth could not take the part of her that made her the person she was. This song is primarily a breakup track, which is perfect because Mary's life was one huge breakup after another. Personally, I would have picked her signature colour to have been red, as she wore red to her execution, and her story has connotations of sacrifice, lust and bloodshed. Then again, it is easier to make an animatic with a pink background as opposed to a red one, and we get to see her execution dress more prominently against a pink backdrop. Mary's sixth persona sports a black and pink striped playsuit with fishnet sleeves and tights, along with a choker with an M on it. The trend for six is that the divorced wives wear spiky tiaras, beheaded wives wear chokers with the initial of their first or last name, and the wives who either died of natural causes or survived wear large hoops. We saw this with Lady Jane Grey. I would have preferred to give Mary an S for Stuart, and we could give the M to Marie Antoinette. I like the wordless dynamic between Mary and Elizabeth here, where the latter's disdain towards the former is only skin deep, and Elizabeth actually tries to recall the death warrant and is shown running to the place of execution with her Gloriana facade falling away, and she enters too late. Then it cuts to Mary waking up in her sixth persona and being helped to her feet by Elizabeth, where they have a cheerful reunion and embrace tearfully, for only in death could they ever be equals. Elizabeth then reveals to Mary that James would become King of England and Scotland, uniting the two realms. By the way, I totally support more of these fan-made spin-offs. I've already done some designs of my own. So this, the ones for, come on, open. So we've got Richard III here, and I've designed Catherine of Medici. I drew that last night. I would like to share these somewhere. Maybe I'll make another DeviantArt or a Tumblr, somewhere that I can share this art without it being stolen.
Il fait si froid en Écosse, et tous mes sujets semblent haïr leur reine.
C'est parce que vos sujets ne connaissent pas encore la reine, et que la reine doit s'habituer à des lames plus acérées.
Comment fait ma cousine? Comment? On ne peut pas simplement décapiter tous ceux qui vous contredisent.
This is one of the movies I didn't know existed until I embarked upon this journey. Probably because this is a Swiss-made venture, although they did cast a few British actors. British also including English, Welsh and Scottish, because Scots are Brits for now. The language is split up between French and English, although it tends to stick to the former as much as possible. Mary is immediately an outsider due to her accent and her penchant for speaking in French amongst her ladies and David Rizzio. The film feels more like a psychological horror than anything else. It is told mostly in flashback, with Mary narrating parts of her life in a series of undelivered letters to Elizabeth. Elizabeth herself never appears, and exists only as a faceless force. Mary wanted to get a look at her, but never met her face to face, so she is both afraid of and angry at this phantom queen. She recounts her childhood in the rough wooing, and struggles to separate her memories of the war from actual nightmares. She feels guilty that such violence happened because of her, even though she had no control over that. The last time she sees her mother is when Mary is about to depart for France, disguised as a boy. She and the four Marys travel together in boys' clothing to protect their identities. The four Marys are present throughout, but they have few opportunities to stand out individually. I could not tell you which was which from this lineup. Mary and Francois II's marriage, while loving, is depicted somewhat realistically. Francois is frail and too fascinated with having a gun to be aroused by Mary. You can also see the cotton wool in his ear to reference his ill health. It is hinted that he died during a riding accident on a hunt, when his horse returns without him. Afterwards, Mary returns to Scotland, once again disguised in men's clothes. This is where we meet Lord Bothwell, played by Sean Biggerstaff. They have not exactly a meet-cute, but he does leave an impression on her.
I'm all for courage, but you only have one life.
Moray has no affection for his sister. He talks down to her frequently and regularly presumes to put himself before her when she has to remind him of his place. John Knox is introduced with a human side, as he arrives to converse with Mary, accompanied by his wife and children. Nonetheless, his stubbornness is exhausting for Mary. She tries to promote tolerance, but he won't have it. So much for love your enemies. Darnley is not introduced until the 35-minute mark, where he is already in Scotland and has bonded with Mary and her ladies over a game of tennis. By then, Mary has already decided he will be her husband. This Darnley, played by Aneurin Barnard, is much more subdued. He is not quick to anger. More, his lack of confidence and clear feelings of emasculation against Mary's stronger personality makes him easily manipulated, by the Protestants and by Mary. Nonetheless, he's a little more pitiable, as he clearly wants to make up for being part of Rizzio's murder. But Mary refuses to forgive him. I felt sorry for Barnard in this. He's a little bit wasted. Also, does he die in literally everything he's in? The White Queen, Dunkirk, David Copperfield? Mary has some part in his death, as she doesn't seem so surprised when Kirkerfield explodes. The structure of the movie is a little off sometimes. Why exactly does it cut to Mary's execution for a brief moment when there's still 45 minutes left? That would have made a much better ending scene. I like a lot of movies like this where you have to sit and think about the imagery, but I don't really know why the execution couldn't wait till the end, if it had to be shown at all. Camille Rutherford does well for the part she's given. She shows a Mary with inner strength, but her naivete and her attempts to try and keep the peace are thwarted every time, and she doesn't have it in her to be as ruthless as her enemies. The first time she actually stands up for herself isn't until after she has married Bothwell, and the Scottish lords try putting her in her place. A little too late for her to find her voice there. And yes, she looks exactly like Rachel Weisz. I couldn't get that out of my head the whole time I was watching this. Rachel Weisz would have been perfect for Mary Queen of Scots. Why did we never do that? Hey, she would have made a perfect Anne Boleyn as well. If I had to compare this with any other film, there is one similar that released last year about Empress Elizabeth of Austria named Corsage. There are a lot of silent moments, and the language flips between English and German. The intention of films like these are almost to trap you in the main character's mindset, with the scenery of Scotland's foggy mountains and sweeping moors to give you a feeling of isolation and feeling lost, as Mary often does throughout the film. It's an okay movie to watch if you're in that sort of mood for it, but you need to keep your brain switched on in order to fully process what's happening.
You were not announced. I'm not here. Why do you come? Is it curiosity? To witness my confinement?
ITV made a terrible two-part Tudor drama in 2003, and the BBC made a terrible two-part Tudor drama in 2004. And then Channel 4 came along and made one in 2005. And this Tudor drama has Eddie Redmayne in it. And it was directed by Tom Hooper. Guys, he's climbing on a barricade.
run.
But don't worry, against all the odds, this series is actually good. I can't believe this mini-series passed me by when my Tudor obsession began. I do remember seeing the clip of the Babington plotters being executed on YouTube once, and I clicked off it just as fast, but I thought that was a clip from the Virgin Queen. The first episode surrounds the Babington plot and the espionage surrounding Elizabeth's reign. What I loved about this was that we got a more realised world outside of the palace. I adore the aesthetic of Tudor London. It's always a redeeming feature for a period piece when we see something like this, and not just the palace interiors. The casting is also top-notch. Helen Mirren as Elizabeth I is a no-brainer. Ian McDiarmid is the perfect William Cecil. Barbara Flynn's Mary only appears in 2 scenes, but she leaves a good impression on the audience. The first scene is a secret meeting between her and Elizabeth. I like that they emphasise that this meeting is strictly off the record. No one is to know Elizabeth is there. As such, no one will know that these 2 queens have actually met. This Mary is world-weary. Elizabeth has only come to see her to confirm that she won't conspire to take her throne, for if she does, Elizabeth will have to execute her. And if it comes to that, then France and Spain will threaten Elizabeth's throne. Elizabeth harshly remonstrates Mary, as we have often seen her do in these fictional meetings. In return, Mary chastises Elizabeth's coldness, a coldness that has come from having to sacrifice her own happiness for the good of the realm. Killing Mary is the last thing Elizabeth wants, but Mary's desire for liberty means she is nonetheless dangerous. Elizabeth is furious when Mary's part in the Babington plot is revealed. Her inner turmoil is enough to summon Robert Dudley back from his duties in Holland, but he does not tell Elizabeth what she wants to hear. Elizabeth signs the warrant, but refuses to hand it over to the council, so Davison takes it to them anyway. Dudley decides to take on the nastier business of witnessing the execution and telling Elizabeth how it went. This shows Mary's execution in all its inelegant glory. I like the build-up of Mary going to the block and comforting her maid, where it presents her wanting to go out with dignity, but even that is robbed of her. From the denial of her rosary to the botched job of the axeman. Dudley really does not want to tell Elizabeth how this went down. I wish this had been a full series like Elizabeth R. It had some great potential. I suppose the hindrance would have been that you'd have had to change your entire cast halfway through to replace the younger actors with older ones. But I think the popularity of The Crown and House of the Dragon has proved that such a practice is no longer a problem. Who knew that Tom Hooper can actually direct competently? Maybe he should just stay away from musicals.
But you can tell the nobles who alerted you to my activities this afternoon that I have no desire to impose my religion on anyone else or to impede the worship of theirs.
You, your faith, and the Vatican are the real threat to peace.
I have returned home to lead this country to greatness. Help me bring all of my people together, or may God and your queen have mercy on your soul.
Let's talk about Adelaide Kane in Rain, which is not set in Spain, nor feature Lois Lane. The show can be a pain, but if we can refrain from the strain and ascertain what is plain, we may yet become sane. When I started watching this show last year, I had no idea what I was in for. This series has been reviled by history nerds for its insane inaccuracy and cringe plotlines involving love triangles and those pesky misunderstandings that characters refuse to talk out. Believe me, there are some characters whom I genuinely hated in this show, and it infuriates me that because the series was prematurely cancelled, the 2 most hateable characters got off scot-free, pun intended, with no resolution. I've gone into greater detail about my feelings for the series in both my vlogs of the first 11 episodes and my reviews of each season. As of this video's release, I haven't yet done my review of season 3 and 4, but I already know what I'm going to say. The first episode is probably the worst, but it does get better from there. The more I watched, the more I came to enjoy. Season 1 was a slog, probably because it took the longest to watch. Season 2 turned the show into a guilty pleasure. Season 3 broke my heart. And Season 4 made me feel sorry for it. It's easier to watch when you view it as a show on its own, rather than a historical drama. While you can find references to actual events, it makes up more than its fair share. Mary Livingston was never King Henry II's mistress. Mary Beaton did not open a brothel. Mary Seton didn't die from falling down the stairs. Catherine de' Medici did not strangle Diane de Poitiers to death, but that is so what she would have done. Mary Fleming was not beheaded by Elizabeth I, nor did she have a son with Francois II, nor did she marry Haldir of Lorient when he was going through his Jason Isaacs phase. There never was a Sebastian de Poitiers, thankfully. And Mary Queen of Scots never stabbed John Barrowman in the neck.
12 seconds later.
Was someone kissing me?
Now I've got the obligatory "but that didn't happen" tangent out of the way. I'm here to tell you that this show doesn't deserve to be completely written off. For one thing, I've rarely seen such a solidly written main female character who is allowed to be flawed but sympathetic. Adelaide Kane's Mary Stuart is probably too well written for her own good. The first 3 seasons predominantly takes place at the French court, where Mary and her 4 ladies-in-waiting have to survive the ins and outs of politics. They fall in and out of love and foil numerous plots. 8 episodes in, Mary Seaton, aka Ailey, gets killed off, and everyone forgets she existed, and she's not even in the montage in the final episode. No, I am still not over that injustice. She was done dirty.
Relax and chant with me.
It's okay. It's okay. It's gonna be okay. Matcha. Matcha makes everything better. Damn, that's hot. While I really could have lived without any and all love triangles in this show, I came to love Mary and Francois' relationship, not only because Kane and Toby Regbo had good chemistry, but their love is the foundation for each other's strength. When it gets threatened, everything falls apart. I cried like a baby when Francois died. I remember seeing a tweet ages ago before I deleted my Twitter account. Yes, I deleted my Twitter account, by the way. I haven't actually been able to put that announcement into a video. Anyway, one tweet said something along the lines of... meow, yes. It said along the lines of meow. Thank you, Alan. Watching anything about Mary Queen of Scots after seeing Rain and realising Mary wasn't that smart. Mary gets herself out of a lot of sticky situations with just her mind and the loyalty of others. Dodgy marriage treaties, assassination attempts...
That was for David Rosier.
Ritual sacrifice. The first episode of season 4, when she got kidnapped and literally saved herself without breaking a sweat, was something that season 1 Mary wouldn't have been able to do alone. So I wondered, how were they going to get around Mary's ultimate downfall? Mary could not act like her historical counterpart because it would betray the person we have come to know over the past 62 episodes. I mean, can you imagine a long-running TV show with an intelligent main character who suddenly stops being intelligent for the sake of plot? I will go into further detail during the final review, but the show makes good use of developing why things go wrong. Will Kemp is probably the best Lord Darnley.
Someone who's big in Italy, maybe?
Who said that?
I did, so...
Purely because he has enough screen time to go from a promising potential husband to a serious risk to Mary's throne. They could have been a power couple, but life got in the way. You don't feel sympathy for Darnley by any means, but he's not cartoonishly evil. One could argue that the show is a little transparent with the rivalry between Mary and John Knox, spelling out that he hates her because she's a woman and he hates women, but that is literally the final episode and things were rushed against the creator's will, so I can hardly hold that against them. Rain's Mary is definitely a Mary people would want to follow. Though she doubts herself, she has an inner strength and confidence that makes men fall at her feet. It's just a shame that John Knox was playing by different rules and had a head start in defaming her. The finale is upsetting, not just because the show was abruptly cancelled so they were unable to end it on its own terms, but also because there's an air of not this time about it. Mary is on her way to the block, a fate that she has dodged many times, but there is no escaping that fate now. Her luck has run out. She has lost literally everyone important to her. I cried during the ending, I am not ashamed to admit it. While Rain is not perfect, it is a prime example of not judging a book by its cover.
Oh no, I used to think it was all crappage, but if you really read it and give it a chance and come back to it quite a few times and slowly familiarise yourself with the language and the imagery, weirdly you can start to sort of enjoy it.
The French to leave Scotland?
And I to give up all claim to the English crown? Never. Never.
When I saw this version of Mary, I got the vibe of a very disappointed English teacher. I mean, I was doing my GCSEs at the time. For real though, when it comes to making a rival to Glenda Jackson's magnitude, you need someone who was going to match that stubbornness and cunning. Vivian Pickles only appears in 2 of the 6 episodes. Her first is in episode 2, The Marriage Game, where she has a few brief scenes, where she is the lone occupant in each one. First, she reads a letter aloud before remarking on it. Then she talks to someone off screen about the death of Amy Robsart. And finally, she appears for all of 5 seconds as she receives a marriage offer for Robert Dudley. You get some sense of the passage of time in that last scene, where in the previous 2, Mary was wearing purple, but now she is dressed in full mourning garb. Much like with the Virgin Queen, there are significant time jumps between episodes. The second episode ended in the early 1560s, and the third began in the 1570s, not long after the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. Mary does not appear, as she is already imprisoned at the time, but there is an appearance by Catherine de Medici. The 4th episode, Horrible Conspiracies, begins in the 1580s. Mary and Elizabeth have standoffs by proxy. Mary is clearly frustrated by her circumstances and the company of her jailer, so Gifford's appearance brings a sudden relief. Mary is brash and rude, but like Elizabeth, you feel sorry for her. Elizabeth R gives a very realistic interpretation of events. Scenes where she is being interrogated feel very much like you're sitting in on the conversation but not contributing to it. Her surroundings show a very stark contrast to Elizabeth's gaudy court and wardrobe, where the only object of grandiosity for Mary is her cloth of state, and even that is taken away from her. The execution scene holds nothing back, except for seeing the actual decapitation. It cuts away from that. But I like that the realism is adhered to. When actual history happens, there is no dramatic lighting or background score. It's just a cold Wednesday morning in February. Elizabeth's monologue at the end really emphasises the morbid motif throughout the episode.
Dying is a fearful process. I have known death since I was a child. I have stared long into his white, unseeing eyes. I know his dread cruelty. Remember my words, and recall how you plotted my cousin's most terrible end.
Mary Stuart!
Who is this man?
John Knox, madam, the leader of our church.
Of your church, not mine, brother.
Hear me! I have prayed that this queen would die before she set foot on this land.
I will hear with patience your ugly words, John Knox. For you, like all my subjects, shall have the free use of your conscience, and I of mine.
Right on.
Once again, we have a powerful actress to stand against Glenda Jackson. Vanessa Redgrave, rather than matching Jackson's tenaciousness, has a proud dignity about her, one where she refuses to let her resolve break in public, especially in front of Elizabeth. This film is the unofficial sequel to Anne of the Thousand Days, where it had the same director and producer, Charles Jarrett and Hal B. Wallace, and they even reference a scene in the previous film. The one thing it has over Anne of the Thousand Days is the capture of the outdoor scenery in France, England and Scotland. Although the use of Alnwick Castle in Northumberland as the scene for Mary's departure from France looks as if Mary is leaving Hogwarts. I thought she attended Beauxbaton. Surprisingly, only 2 of the 4 Marys are present here, Fleming and Seton, who Mary addresses by their last names. The film makes good use of setting up Mary being a hopeless romantic in the opening credits, with her and Francois walking through the gardens in the early morning, which is one of the few moments where the 2 of them can get a chance to, at last, enjoy some privacy away from the world, only for their happiness to be interrupted by Francois' ill health. He seems quite a bit older than the age he actually was, older than Mary even, but he's around just long enough for the audience to feel sorry for him when he also dies from a riding accident. The Darnley marriage is a plot by Elizabeth to sabotage Scottish politics, so she doesn't have to worry about Mary being a threat to her from the north now that she has returned to Scotland. While it looks as if she is sending Robert Dudley to be the suitor, she also sends Darnley, whose charm and immaturity will attract Mary, but will ultimately destroy her. Darnley is played by a very young Timothy Dalton, who is very good at playing the entitled and insufferable fellow. He lets his facade fall the moment he and Mary are married, and his jealousy of Rizzio, played by Ian Holm, is emphasised mostly because they were briefly lovers, and Rizzio could expose his sexuality to the court, but also because Rizzio is respected by Mary, and Darnley just can't stand that. As such, Darnley's death is satisfying to witness, especially seeing him crumble into a blubbering mess. Bothwell is an interesting fellow. He is played by Patrick McGoohan, aka Number 6. His flaws are plain to see, as he marries against Mary's permission, but no mention is made of what happened to his wife in the gap between Mary giving birth to James and Darnley's murder. But you can guess it was not honourable. Elizabeth and Mary meet not just once, but twice. The first meeting is after Mary has come to England, confident of her cousin's help. I noticed the way they were walking here, where Mary attempts to walk away from Dudley, who is holding the horses, so their conversation is more private, but Elizabeth steers them back in his direction, either for her safety, or so, if the meeting is discovered, Elizabeth has a witness to anything Mary says or does. Her second meeting comes 19 years later, after the Babington plot has been foiled, and Mary is taken to Fotheringay. This is the film's callback to Anne of the Thousand Days, where, once Henry VIII was pleading for Anne Boleyn to take the easy way out and live, now Elizabeth is doing the same for Mary, with a similar outcome. Redgrave's Mary sees her impending execution as her last way out of her imprisonment, and has replaced her romantic nature for one of a martyr destined to fall at the hand of Elizabeth, and mar her reign forever. It's hard to believe that Jackson didn't want to play Elizabeth again, because she packs a punch each time. In truth, she preferred Mary's role because, and I quote, she was a tart. It's a good classic movie to watch, especially when you want to admire some great costume work and scenery. It gives me the urge to ride a horse through a meadow in a long dress.
But I'm through. I'm going to live my own life, do as I say. I refuse to marry. I love no one and I shall marry no one. I'm going to begin to be myself, Mary Stuart.
Anne of the Thousand Days fans are not done yet. Mary of Scotland was based on a play written by the same author, Maxwell Anderson. He also wrote The Bad Seed. Mary of Scotland was originally staged in 1933, and the film was released in 1936. Originally, Katharine Hepburn wanted to audition for Elizabeth. She is a direct descendant of Lord Bothwell, sharing the same last name as him. She, and Ginger Rogers of all people, were doing a screen test at the same time. Hepburn realised that Rogers and a few RKO staff were attempting to trick the director John Ford into casting Rogers. Hepburn retaliated by kicking Ginger Rogers in the shins and pouring water on her fur coat, saying, "If it's real mink, it won't shrink." After Hepburn was cast as Mary, they struggled to cast Elizabeth, and she suggested playing both roles. John Carradine, who played Rizzio, said, "If you play both queens, how would you know which one to upstage?" Hepburn was one of those actresses who was considered difficult to work with due to her lofty nature and struggles with stage fright. During the filming of Mary of Scotland, she would come to be known as Catherine of Arrogance. Regardless of these struggles, her Mary is underrated but iconic. Perhaps Hepburn's on-set behaviour carried through into her performance, but you get the impression of a woman who hates being told what to do by people she doesn't like. Sometimes it's tricky to see where her American accent ends and her English accent begins. It might be because she had a posh upbringing in Connecticut, so Mid-Atlantic does sound a lot like English. All her ladies are once again present, as a trusting group of friends supporting Mary. Beaton gets a little moment to herself as she laments loving someone of lower birth, whom she cannot marry. Hang on a second, that sounds familiar. There is a brief time jump between Mary accepting Darnley's proposal to a later scene where he arrives at a Privy Council meeting, late and drunk. Mary has reluctantly married him, as she loves Bothwell. I'm surprised they were able to mention Mary's pregnancy, and later Darnley's threat to disown their child at a time when the Hayes Code had just been implemented. The main conflict within the film is Mary's struggle with autonomy. She has been told what to do all her life, and has been used for others. The Protestant Council are aghast that she doesn't want to do that anymore, and resolves to live for herself. At first she is tempted to abandon Scotland, until she sees the people come to the palace to greet her with a song. Then, John Knox, Scotland's biggest party pooper, has to rush in and start preaching at them. Although they do at least give him a motive in this version, where his mentor was executed by Marie de Guise. In the middle of his preaching, Bothwell's pipers march in and play over him. Remember, the only way to shut up hate preachers is to drown them out until they lose their voice. Mary's resolve breaks, however, when she learns of Bothwell's death at her trial. Elizabeth gets to throw her own barbs at Mary before the end, reminding her that she was given power, whereas Elizabeth had to fight for it. Mary still refuses to submit and wishes to die, where she bravely goes to her death, and she hears Bothwell's pipers as she ascends the scaffold. Before she is even there, however, she is stripped of her headdress and ruff, as if people haven't taken enough from her already. Her neck still remains covered, as Katharine Hepburn was self-conscious about her neck. When I watched this movie, I was coming off a lot of those worse interpretations you have seen on the list. I know the production of this film was a nightmare, but the end product was such a wonderful relief that I was glad I saved it for last, and it definitely deserves its place at the top of the list. As interesting as the life of Mary Queen of Scots is, this list has proven that it can be tricky to make a new portrayal stand out. Aside from Katharine Hepburn and Vanessa Redgrave, whose Marys are usually seen as the gold standard, most of the other Marys tend to stand out for the wrong reasons. When it comes to the rivalry between Mary and Elizabeth, depending on which one the protagonist is meant to be, it can come off as bad fanfiction, where the virtues of one queen is emphasised, while the other is written so badly out of character that they're unrecognisable. I commend Rain for at least trying to find a balance between the two flawed individuals, trying to keep their heads above water in a dangerous world. But now we have to look at the rivalry in more depth as we move on to Mary's definitive moment. And you know what that means? Analysing a bunch of executions. Depending on how long that script is, we may have to make another video, but we'll see. Sometimes I think we've reached the end. But we still got a ways to go. So if you're new to the channel, we do this at the end of every rankings video. I pick a random screenshot, we caption it, we have fun. I read them off at the end of the video, and boom, let's just get straight into it. So this time it's a screen grab from Rain. I found this while I was editing the season 2 review.
And a school of dolphins swam up all around us.
Really?
Now, they were so close, so wild, and one of them raised its head and looked at me, as if he could say something.
Sorry.
So the context of this image is that in one episode, Kenna finds a diary about how great certain male nobles of the court are in bed, and she and Lola are trying to figure out who it is. Catherine points them towards this one guy, and what's up? Oh, I don't want anything from Uber Eats, thank you very much. And so, because Ken is already married, and at the moment happily married, she says to Lola, hey, you should try and sleep with this guy, see what he's like. And turns out that's not actually the guy who they're looking for. Sorry, I'm about to do captions, and then suddenly I get a news alert saying that Donald Trump is on the stand. Not as interesting as that time I was recording a vlog and then I found out the Queen was about to die. Anyway, is this serious? Him? Of all people? At this party? Him? You chose to ignore David from HR for him? Me trying to discreetly tell my friend that she is talking to the man who broke into the British Museum, destroyed the Most Happy Medal, and ran over a litter of kittens as he escaped. Well, apparently you don't actually have to break into the British Museum to steal things, you just have to work there. Or in Lara Croft's case, you work at the British Museum, you can use the Egyptology wing as an obstacle course. Me presenting my math homework to my dad to sign after he asked me if I did it correctly. When you see your brother and your best friend hit it off, and you're not sure which one you should warn. This is me trying to warn my friend that the guy she's been interested in has terrible taste in couples from TV shows, like Joey and Rachel, or Gail and Katniss. Oh, by the way, R.I.P. Matthew Perry. Maybe this person also ships Eren and Levi in Attack on Titan, which I just don't get because they hate each other. The Kenna blooper reel. Don't be greedy, Mary. Please go over there so I can have a shot at the guy. Hey, Mary, wanna play charades? Me presenting my Halloween costume to social media in a nervous way. P.S. I dressed up as both Anne Boleyn and Jane Seymour. During 2020, even though we didn't really have trick-or-treaters, I dressed up for Halloween anyway. I was zombie Anne Boleyn. And now, this thing. Lola, that's not your blind date. coming from the future to try and stop her from making a mistake that will lead to her death. Also, he's got a lot of red flags. Oh, can I just say, if Kenna actually hadn't left in season 2, there is no way Lola would have been executed, because they would have arranged a thing, so Kenna would have gone with Lola to England and been like, don't do that, it's a really stupid idea. But no, because Sebastian was a wanker and sent her away, then Lola died. It's all Sebastian's fault. Don't mind me, I'm just jamming to Dancing Queen. I wanted Henry Cavill for my threesome, and you got me this Canadian Bargate basement rip-off. Lola, are you blind? I'm surprised there are no Narnia jokes on this list. I'm sorry, Lola, but this is the wrong kind of partner to watch Eureka 7 with you. He looks like the kind of twit who can never love sci-fi romance anime. Get rid of him ASAP. You should romance Ben Barnes instead. Oh yes, there we go, here's a Narnia reference at last. Lola's biggest mistake was leaving Narnia. She should have just stayed there. Because my personal belief is, and I really hope other people share this belief, is that Lola is Susan. She went full Midsummer after her family died in a train crash, and she went looking for Narnia, couldn't find Narnia, ended up in the universe of Rain, and then stole the identity of the real Lola Fleming, and just like, this is my life now. Until it isn't, when she gets beheaded. Is this the dumbass you're into? I wish I knew sign language. What the heck is Kenna trying to tell me? Girl, he likes dancing. He likes dancing. When she tells your friend he has a massive sword, but you've seen how disappointingly short the blade is. I mean, they're Scottish, they expect claymores. Me trying to give my best friend tips on flirting with the guy she's been interested in while she's meeting him. I have no idea how to flirt. When you try to warn your bestie that the guy chatting her up has A, at least one illegitimate kid he doesn't support, B, a history of SA accusations, C, one or more living wives out there, D, one or more dead wives out there whose inheritances he ended up with, E, one or more STDs, or F, all of the above. See, Ken is describing the wrong person, because all of those apply to Lord Narcisse. Yeah, let me just say, Rain was not the Lord of the Rings and Narnia crossover I was expecting. Yes, that was the American and Scots rankings, and I have no idea how long this video is. I've still got lots of editing to do, but hopefully we will get it done, because we have matcha that will keep us alert, but not too alert in the way that coffee does. We have matcha, we have tea, we have cats, we have almonds, and hopefully we will also have brownies when it comes to it. And, I have not actually decided what the next video is going to be yet, because I was initially thinking maybe we could get the video essays for Richard III and Mary Queen of Scots out by the end of the year. But I really want to do Christmas Carol hot takes. You know? Where's the book? Here we go. Alan, are you okay? Oh god! No one will be seated while I make sure that the cat is okay, because he decided to be sick in the middle of the recording. You could have just waited a few more minutes, sweetie, but... Good thing I caught you before you decided to go on the bed, eh? A Christmas Carol, because there are so many adaptations of A Christmas Carol, and I can think of 10 in particular that I really, really want to talk about and analyse. And especially because this one... Because I went to one at the weekend, so of course I have to talk about it. I just felt an urge. I need to work with things, and I want to do a Christmas video, and if we can do more of those literature hot takes videos, maybe by Halloween we can have a Phantom of the Opera hot takes. I love Phantom of the Opera. Yeah, I've got lots of ideas for that, because Romeo and Juliet on Valentine's Day, I'm definitely going to do one of those, and I really want to do a Pride and Prejudice one, but I need to find all the Pride and Prejudices. I only have like 3 of them. Okay, so if you're really excited about videos coming up, please subscribe to the channel. I really could do with more subscribers. I really want to get this channel to reach more people, especially in the upcoming year, and it would be a great help. Okay, so make sure you subscribe, click the bell icon, make sure you like this video, share it around, comment, make sure it gets really good in the algorithm. And I also must thank other supporters to my videos, my patrons. Thank you so much to all my patrons. Their names are listed right here for you to see. Even the smallest contribution is very much appreciated. You will always get your name in the credits, plus access to a Discord server where you can interact with me much more one-on-one. Oh yes, and my King and Queen patrons, who are the highest tier contributors. Thank you so much. Alison Cuff, Anna from Gustine, Annalise Barnett, Jill My Nero, Larissa and Leslie Williams. Love you guys so much, and we'll see you in the next video. Let's get editing.